The transportation and logistics industry has its own set of challenges. In the hot seat, industry thought leaders take on M&A and what's driving the future of transportation and logistics. Are you ready for the hot seat?
Welcome to In the Hot Seat with the Tenney Group. I'm Spencer Tenney. It's good to be with you. My next guest says that a typical TMS has many features, but they just don't work. With me today in the hot seat, we've got Nick Darman from Alvis, the CEO and founder. Nick, welcome to the hot seat.
Thank you. How are you?
All right. Well, I'm good, but we're gonna heat things up here in just a minute, sir. But before we do that, why don't you just take 30 seconds and tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing at Alvis?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. So I'm the founder and CEO of Alvis, and at Alvis, we basically make trucking companies run their businesses more efficient.
Oh, hey, that's about as succinct as a elevator speech as I've heard in quite some time. So with that, let's just jump right in there. Let's talk about the genesis of the story here, because watch some of the videos on the website. But what was it? What was the problem that you came across that you realized that, hey, there's a problem that I can solve? Tell us about that moment.
Yeah, so I guess there's different ways of describing my story and how Alvis came about. But before I give you the reasons as to why I founded Alvis, I guess it's good to understand all of my experiences in the past. And so my trucking experience really started in 2004 while I was at Georgia State, living in Atlanta, Georgia. And it started out of a need to help my parents financially. So I started a trucking company. My dad bought a truck, and he has essentially become an owner-operator, the first owner-operator for my company. And that's what I was doing while studying economics at Georgia State. And so that's one side of the story. The second one, while accumulating some money while doing dispatch work, I invested in a Hispanic magazine targeting Hispanic women in the U.S. That was an interesting experience. But there's a lot of valuable lessons I took from that. One of them to understand the product market fit. The second one was to execute multiple strategies all at once when in doubt and you don't know what to do and which strategy to execute. Then after that, it followed with my experience at JP Morgan. I was doing financial analysis for about 2 years or so. And during my JP Morgan experience is when I realized I'm an entrepreneur at heart. And I went back to my original entrepreneurial experience, which is trucking. But this time around, having some marketing experience, financial analysis, accounting background, understanding how to manage my cash flows when cash is tight, I wanted to actually take the trucking business to the next level. So one of the things that's required to be able to do so, you need a proper platform. You need to be able to manage all these silos simultaneously in order to deliver that holistic experience to your customers. And while growing my business, I switched different platforms, and I realized what I'm looking for doesn't exist in the market, which is essentially what led me to found Alvis in 2020, to basically help supply chain ecosystem by focusing first on trucking needs, by alleviating pain points for trucking companies.
No, I think that's great. I don't think that I realized that you were a JP Morgan guy. So in what way has that experience applied most to, running what is now like one of the fastest growing TMS companies in the world, for that matter? So how did that experience help you?
So I was on a team managing asset-backed securities, mortgage-backed securities. And during that time, basically a trader executes a lot of trades, and I was controlling the balance sheet of those trades. So I was doing a lot of accounting. But when you're working in such a big company, you're dealing with a lot of systems. So obviously a lot of things are being lost in translation. You have to reconcile your books, but at the same time, there's a lot of system errors. So that's what drove me nuts. But that's the experience I realized in order to be able to do something that's important in logistics space, we need to be able to have the integrated experience between different systems. And that was my mindset. When I started trucking company for the second time, I wanted to make sure I have a system that's able to integrate with the broader ecosystem of supply chain in order to be able to deliver that holistic experience to our customers.
So outside of the integration element of all these features, um, why was it necessary for you to create Alvis? I mean, because to me, there's like for the non-tech world, it just feels that there's so many things that are coming out right now. What was the problem that had not yet been solved?
So anyone that's in trucking space, logistics space, everyone knows there's definitely a lot of touch points throughout the life cycle of a shipment. At every turn, there's many moving parts. And so in order to be able to deliver that awesome experience throughout the life cycle of a load to our customers, we need to be able to have rigorous management of each task. To execute those tasks properly, it sounds easy when they're done in silos, but to be able to do them collectively, that's when trouble arises. So in order to deliver that collective experience where you take all those silos and you package them into one holistic experience is exactly what's needed. So that was the missing part. We have a lot of things in the market where there's a lot of products, but they operate in silos. And what was important to me is to take those silos and collectively execute them in one component, so to speak.
Yeah. I teased as we were coming out the gate here about, some of the messaging that I saw in an interview with you, or maybe it was with one of your teammates, but basically he's just talking about, it's not the absence of features, it's that they don't function in a way that is practical or relevant from a business standpoint. Give us an example of that. I mean, what would an example of that? How would a current trucking company experience that right now?
Everything that we do at Alvis, first of all, it's very important to understand what exactly we do at Alvis, because a lot of people, they're trying to compare us at a feature level, right? The way I would describe Alvis is, first of all, we are a multi-tenant, multi-product system of record where we store all those records that are important for our business, whether it's in accounting or at a load level. Then we are a system, or a better way of putting it is a workflow engine, right? Where we take those records that are stored on our platform and we create different workflows to provide users a better experience. At the same time, we are a collaborative system as well. Not only that we are a system of record, workflow engine, and a collaborative system, we're also a hybrid architecture. And what I mean by that, we're able to execute our business as a freight broker or a carrier. And on top of that, we're also an embedded EDI. In other words, we removed the third-party EDI platforms and created the EDI in Alvis in order to reduce those dependencies between the shipper and the carrier. So when you execute all of those things simultaneously, that's the holistic experience I'm talking about. So if you actually look at, okay, how do you do sourcing? How do you procure for different loads? Yeah, you can have a system and do so. But in order to be able to take those loads and further apply different tracking components and then invoice customers simultaneously, and at the same time deliver everything through EDI, that's a completely different experience, but that's exactly what's needed. When you don't combine those items collectively, then you're forced to use different systems. And sometimes a lot of these integrations don't actually work. And when they don't work, you go back to your spreadsheets.
Yeah. Yeah, that's humbling. When you start talking about when it doesn't work, what do people do? They go back to manually doing things, which is probably the worst thing that you could be doing from an efficiency standpoint. I really appreciate how fast you all have moved in the last 2, 3, 4 years to put a very relevant product in the marketplace and to solve a lot of problems. But the business of tech and the supply chain continues to grow and innovate so fast. What do you see ahead? And what's the ecosystem in terms of freight tech going to look like in the next couple of years?
I guess when you ask different people, they're going to give you different answers. From my perspective, what I identified that's very important is that trucking space in the entire supply chain ecosystem. It's very interesting that we're all trying to solve a lot of pain points in supply chain, but one of the most important nodes in supply chain is trucking. But no one is able to actually create, or no one was able to create that breakthrough technology in order to help the trucking space. So in my mind, what's important for us to do is to actually deliver that experience to trucking space. And once we're able to solve for those that actually deliver bread to your table, then that will translate in a better, more efficient supply chain experience. So if you ask me, what do I see in the future? I believe if more people would actually double down on solving the pain points for those that are on the front line, that will actually translate in better efficiency in supply chain.
Interesting. I'm curious. It must be a challenge in a highly competitive freight tech world. Done well. What do you think the keys are to differentiating Alvis from a similar service, solve a similar problem, and how do you expect as other competitors continue to innovate?
So when you're a smaller business or a mid-sized business, you always operate as a hybrid company. Contrary to the belief that, especially contrary to what marketing is teaching us in schools, we in supply chain or in logistics operate in hybrid environments. For example, if you are importing something from a port to a distribution center, so you have a drayage company, that same customer could ask you, hey, could I store my product in your warehouse? And when I'm ready, I'm going to use your over-the-road trucking to be able to deliver that product. So now you participate in drayage, but then at the same time, you also have a warehouse. And if you have an over-the-road component, you're going to be able to service this customer from 3 different aspects.
Right.
In similar fashion, we see the same thing happening when you operate as a trucking company. A shipper is giving you a lot of freight, and they're realizing you're doing very good. And they're asking you to take more freight than the amount of capacity you have. So now, if you don't have the right system to be able to broker it out, you're forced to give those loads back. And essentially, you're bypassing extra revenue you could have earned. And so where we come very different at Alvis, we architected our platform from the beginning to operate as a hybrid platform, but not hybrid in a sense where you're able to log in and be a freight broker, and then log out and log in and be a carrier, in a sense that you could actually house all of the shipments in a unified dashboard, yet at the same time, you manage different P&Ls. So that your one employee, one dispatcher, is able to manage the freight for your customer, and at the same time, that same employee could be applied to broker it out. When you're a smaller company, you don't have the luxury to have departments, carrier sales, account executives, right? Dispatchers. you usually utilize one employee to do different tasks. And if you don't have the system that has this hybrid architecture from the beginning, you're not going to be able to execute efficiently, and you're going to be forced to give those shipments back to your shipper due to lack of system. So we're the first of its kind where we have all the loads in a unified dashboard. One employee could either broker out or dispatch their own trucks. And at the same time, accounting is having a nice time where there's multiple P&Ls for different entities. That's one of the big differences that we differentiate ourselves.
So why do you think other folks have not made that available in the same way that you have?
The complexity on the back end is so big that I believe you need specific type of engineers, Silicon Valley caliber engineers, to be able to create that kind of back end. That's one. And the second, unless you are on the front line, you're not going to be able to really understand what's the actual product market fit. It doesn't matter how many surveys or questionnaires you're going to ask the trucking space. If you're not on the front line, you're going to miss the point. And these are two main components. You need to actually understand exactly what happens on the front line, but at the same time, you could not deliver this kind of architecture without the right type of engineers. So you kind of have to partner up with the right engineers, which is why I partner up with our co-founder, Leo, and he's CTO of Alvis. He has the experience to build industrial grade platforms. And so he has helped us to basically streamline this architecture in a way that it actually works.
And I want to, you made a comment about, understanding from a front line. I'm guessing that you're kind of speaking indirectly about your direct experience as a dispatcher and kind of understanding what you're trying to accomplish. To what degree has that made an influence or an impact on the actual architecture within your platform?
So when I started the trucking business for the second time after JP Morgan, I started as a carrier, but then slowly I moved into freight brokerage, simply for the fact that shippers were giving me more freight than capacity I had. But I wasn't able to manage it efficiently. I had to actually create multiple spreadsheets. I was on one platform, then I would use another platform for the freight brokerage. And my few employees that I had, they had to log into one platform, then into another platform, to a point where the right hand never knew what the left hand is doing. And we just created a mess. And so I said to myself, wouldn't it be nice if we could actually manage all of these shipments in one centralized dashboard, yet have different multiple P&Ls and apply fewer employees to basically go between one task and another task. And that was the discovery point. We need to create something like that. And when I presented that to our engineering team, they thought I'm crazy, because truly it is very complex to do it on the back end. It's a lot. It sounds a lot easier, and I was a bit delusional. I thought it's easier. Actually, when I started to build my own proprietary tech, and it took us about a few years to get to a point where the system was operating properly. That's when it hit me. This is a lot more expensive than I thought. And it takes a lot more thought process to build something that's right than what the market thinks from the outside.
No, I think that's probably the understatement of the year right there, Nick. For those that aren't involved, I don't think they have a full appreciation of how much the front end capital is to produce a quality product. Let me ask you this. What do you think is out there kind of there's been so much innovation. I mean, what is out there from a freight tech management or whatever it is that maybe keeps you up at night, that's still out there, that's an interesting problem to solve, maybe that people have tried to solve it, but for whatever reason, it continues to be elusive? What do you see as that problem?
Well, there's always that disconnect between what happens throughout the life cycle of a shipment, where you track and trace, with the sourcing department, where salespeople are trying to source more freight, lucrative freight. And if we're able to combine those two departments in a way where it's more efficient, between sourcing, fulfillment, and accounting, that's one of the things that keeps me up at night. We definitely have to figure out how to help our tenants, our customers, to source better freight, to source better business, to source better capacity, right? And that's an important
Mhm.
that's an important avenue, and technology should be able to solve that. And that's how we're going to drive more efficiencies throughout the organization, because now they could source better business, because it's not about the amount of business, it's
Right.
about better business, quality business, and being able to book it on time. Because if you miss, you're going to be left with a load that's probably not as high of a quality as you wanted it to be, right? So there's always that inefficiency in the market, where the right truck is never matched with the right shipment. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things that keeps me up at night, is how do we create a better sourcing environment for our customers, and broadly for everyone in the trucking space.
I think that's a worthy goal right there. Now, you mentioned just a moment ago about efficiency, and this is where our worlds intersect in terms from an M&A standpoint and a value creation standpoint. Efficiencies drive margins, margins drive business valuations, and obviously valuations drive deal flow. So, how do you think about that as you're creating the tools within your platform? Like, and how do you communicate with customers? Do they think about this is going to make my business more valuable, or do they think it's going to make my life easier, or how does it come up in your conversations, and to what degree does that influence the way people invest in your platform?
So different people have different needs, and
Mhm.
no one customer has the same pain points that another one has. So we kind of have to listen to them and understand exactly what's happening. For example, if you're an enterprise customer, you're forced to be EDI compliant, especially if you have a lot of shippers that require you to be EDI compliant. But we all know that when you send all these EDI messages, the other party doesn't really get them how you intended them to be. And as a result, you have a lot of manual processes. You have a lot of employees that have to make the calls, to their shippers, to their customers, and explain, listen, I sent this message through EDI, but it looks like it's not reflecting what I meant, or maybe the transition has failed somewhere in the process. And unless you have an army of people, unless you have a lot of people to be able to manage each shipment, each update that you are required by the shipper, then you're going to fail. Your scorecard is going to get reduced. And when your scorecard is reduced, all of a sudden you're not getting better freight in the next RFP.
Yeah.
And so for that, we realized EDI is broken. EDI shouldn't even exist, but shippers are, I don't want to call they're stuck in the past, but they're actually, I don't want to offend shippers, but in
Yeah.
reality, they are stuck in the past. EDI shouldn't even exist in today's world, right? But because they have adopted and they're grandfathered with this old tech, they're forcing this onto the entire vendor system. All their carriers, they have to do that. So carriers are at the mercy of what shippers want. And all of a sudden, they need to hire more people in order to make sure their scorecards are staying high. And that's just not that's really creating a lot of inefficiencies, if that makes sense. So we decided to slowly kill EDI, if you will, by building that in-house, reducing the dependency that a lot of these carriers have, where they have to onboard a third-party EDI, so that we create a more flawless experience. At least there's two parties. There's always going to be problems, but at least there's a problem between the carrier and the shipper, and those could be identified quicker and solve them quicker.
Interesting. Very rough freight cycle, last 20 plus. How do you think about freight cycles? Are they predictable? And if so, how?
As when I majored in economics and when I graduated from Georgia State, our economics professor, one of the economics professors, said, "Well, I want you all to understand that if any economist is predicting the timing, that's a bad economist." I mean, we could predict we could explain the cycles. We could never predict the timing, and that was an interesting lesson. So I went to school for 4 years to study economics just to not be able to predict the timing. That's interesting, right?
The weather. I mean, that's kind of how it goes, right? So
yeah. So I think same thing is applied, in freight cycles. We could all look in the past and try to apply the past variables or components to understand how our future will happen. But in reality, there's always something that hasn't happened in the past, and because things are never equal in our lives, you're essentially not going to be able to predict the exact timing. But there's two. So my point about this, when you look at what happened in the past 4 or 5 years, even before COVID, one of very interesting phenomena that happened in the industry, a lot of folks started to outsource their business, right? So there's a lot of outsourcing, offshoring, and nearshoring. That essentially reduces the amount of money you pay your employees. So as a result, you actually create better margins. So the previous freight cycles, before this entire phenomena of outsourcing, they probably never accounted this as part of their puzzle, right? As part of their equation. This time around, everyone is waiting for a lot of these trucking companies to go out of business. But guess what? They're all using outsourced staffing. And when you're using outsourced staffing, naturally, you're going to have a lot more reserves, a lot more cash reserves, I mean. Mm-hmm. And as a result, maybe the trucking companies are not going to go out of business as fast as we predicted, which is one interesting way of looking at it. Second part, I would say a lot of folks have gotten a lot of money from COVID money. Again, all of a sudden they have more money in their accounts and everyone is hanging on. So there's two aspects that are very interesting to me. Again, I'm not here to predict the freight cycles, but these are two big forces that's actually dictating as to why a lot of the trucking companies are not going out of business faster than everyone anticipated, because everyone thought a lot of the trucking companies, especially those that are short on cash, they should have already been out of business, and therefore the freight market should have already been fixed months ago, but it didn't happen. And who knows what else I'm missing, right? So I'm not here to predict the timing on freight cycles, but it's definitely an interesting conversation to have.
Very interesting. So I've got one more question for you, Nick. A little bit of a wild card, a little bit of a hot seat tradition here. So a couple things that you mentioned. One, you talk about Georgia State. My father-in-law, also a Georgia State grad back in the day. And then you also talked about working with your dad early on, which obviously, if you know my story, and my dad and I worked together for 25 years doing M&A together until I bought him out in 2018. So I'm curious, what's the best business advice you ever received from your dad?
Just be honest and take care of people as honest as you can.
That's a good word right there. And a good word to end on. Hey, Nick, I really appreciate your time and your insights for our audience here. Such good stuff. And I just want to encourage you, keep doing great things. with Alvis. That's going to do it for us here in the hot seat. We will see you next time.
Thank you.